People say not to bite the hand that feeds you, but my stepson Julian wanted to sever mine just to impress his absentee father. He forgot who actually built his logistics empire and secured the loans. He banned me from his wedding for being too old. So at 10:30 this morning, as he exchanged vows, I pressed enter. By the time the reception ends, his entire company will be nothing but legal dust. My name is Thomas Martinez. For 40 years, I have made a living by predicting disaster. In my professional life, I am a senior crisis management advisor for Vanguardalith Solutions, a firm that corporations call when they are bleeding money and cannot find the tourniquet. My job is not to comfort CEOs or tell them that everything is going to be all right. My job is to look at the spreadsheets, the operational workflows, and the hidden liabilities, and tell them exactly which limb they need to amputate to save the body. I am a man of numbers, of rigid protocols, and of absolute unyielding facts. Emotions are variables that introduce error into the equation, so I usually do my best to factor them out. However, 18 years ago I allowed a variable to enter my life that I could not quantify. I met Elena. She was beautiful, chaotic, and warm in a way that my cold, analytical existence desperately needed. But Elena came as a package deal. She had a 10-year-old son named Julian. When I first met the boy, he was a ball of kinetic energy and undirected rage. His biological father had walked out on them 3 years prior, leaving behind nothing but bad credit and a sense of abandonment that Julian wore like a second skin. Julian was smart, terrifyingly so, but he lacked discipline. He was like a high-performance engine vibrating itself to pieces because it had no chassis to hold it together. I did not try to be his friend. I did not try to be the fun stepfather who bought him video games to buy his affection. I became his chassis. I taught him that anger was useless, unless it was converted into focus. I sat with him at the kitchen table every night for 8 years, forcing him to show his work in calculus, forcing him to rewrite his English essays until the logic flowed like a river. I applied the same principles to raising him that I applied to saving distressed companies: identify the weakness, reinforce the structure, and maximize the potential. By the time Julian was 24, he was ready to conquer the world, or at least he thought he was. He had a vision for a logistics company that utilized predictive algorithms to optimize shipping routes in real time. It was a brilliant concept, but a concept is worth $0 without execution. Julian had the charisma. He could sell ice to a polar bear, but he had no capital, no credit history, and absolutely no understanding of the regulatory hellscape that is the American transportation industry. That was where I stepped in. I did not just offer advice. I offered my life's work. I liquidated a significant portion of my retirement portfolio. I leveraged my reputation, a currency I had spent 4 decades minting, to secure meetings with investors who would not have looked twice at a 24-year-old kid in a hoodie. We founded Aerostream Logistics. But here is the technical detail that Julian, in his youthful arrogance, never bothered to fully understand. When we structured the initial capital injection, banks were wary of a startup with no assets. To secure the necessary liquidity, I personally signed for the commercial mortgage-backed securities that purchased our first 2 warehouses in New Jersey and California. I put my name on the line as the primary guarantor. If Aerostream defaulted, the banks would not just take the trucks. They would come for everything I owned. Furthermore, there was the matter of Nexus. Nexus was the proprietary software that ran the entire operation. Julian thinks he built it because he hired the UI designers who made it look pretty. He forgets that the core architecture, the complex decision trees that actually tell the trucks where to go and how to load the cargo to maximize fuel efficiency, was written by me. I spent 6 months of sleepless nights coding the back end because we could not afford a senior developer. Because I wanted to protect the company from potential hostile takeovers in the future, and because I was the one who wrote the code, I retained the intellectual property rights to the Nexus source code in my personal name. I granted Aerostream Logistics a license to use it, It was a verbal agreement, a handshake between a father and a son. I told him, "You can use it forever as long as you keep the business clean." There was no paper trail transferring ownership to the corporation. In the eyes of the law, Nexus was my intellectual property on loan to his empire. Fast forward to today. Aerostream Logistics is valued at roughly $50 million. We have a fleet of 200 trucks and contracts with major retail giants. Julian is the face of the company. He is the one on the cover of industry magazines, smiling that winning smile, talking about disruption and paradigm shifts. He was recently named one of the top entrepreneurs under 30 in the state. And where am I? I am in the basement. Literally and metaphorically. While Julian attends galas and networks with venture capitalists, I am in my home office until 2 in the morning, reconciling the ledgers. I handle the tax compliance. I manage the risk assessments. I ensure that when Julian promises a client impossible delivery, times the system does not collapse under the weight of his ego. The dynamic between us has shifted over the last few years. As the bank account grew, Julian's respect for me diminished. He started treating my caution as cowardice. He began to see my insistence on regulatory compliance as an annoyance. "You are such a dinosaur, Thomas," he told me last month, when I refused to sign off on a purchase order for a fleet of electric trucks that had not passed safety stress tests. "This is how business is done now. You move fast and break things." "You do not break safety protocols," I replied, my voice level. "Because when you break things in logistics, people die or you get sued into oblivion. I am the one who keeps you out of court, Julian." He just rolled his eyes and walked away. He sees me as the handbrake on his Ferrari. He does not understand that without brakes, a Ferrari is just a very expensive coffin. Elena has not helped matters. Over the years, she has grown accustomed to the lifestyle that Aerostream provides. She drives a Mercedes that the company leases. She spends her days at the country club or shopping for interior decor. She loves the version of Julian that the world sees, the successful, rich, handsome CEO. She does not see the brat who throws tantrums when the quarterly earnings are 0.2% lower than projected. Whenever I try to talk to her about Julian's reckless spending or his dismissal of basic operational security, she waves me off. "Oh, stop being so grumpy, Thomas," she says, sipping her Chardonnay. "He is young. He is successful. Let him enjoy his success. You are always looking for storm clouds on a sunny day." "I look for storm clouds so you two do not get struck by lightning," I tell her. But she just turns up the volume on the television. I have become a utility to them. I am the electricity running through the walls, essential, dangerous, if mishandled, but completely invisible, until the moment the lights go out. Then came the announcement that would set the stage for the end of everything. Julian came over for dinner on a Sunday evening 3 months ago. He was glowing. He brought a bottle of champagne that cost more than my first car. He had news. He had proposed to Clarissa. I knew Clarissa. She was a nice enough girl, but she came from a world I did not understand and, frankly, did not trust. Her family was old money East Coast aristocracy that had migrated west. Her father was a senator. Her mother was on the board of 3 different museums. They were people who lived in a stratosphere where image was the only currency that mattered. "She said yes," Julian announced, popping the cork. "We are going to have the wedding of the century. Her parents are already talking to event planners. They want it to be in the Hampton style, but here." Huge guest list. Senators, CEOs, the works. "Congratulations," I said, and I meant it. Despite his arrogance, I still loved the boy. I had raised him. I wanted him to be happy. "Have you discussed a prenuptial agreement?" The room went silent. Elena gasped. Julian's smile dropped like a stone. "Jesus, Thomas," Julian said, shaking his head. "We haven't even finished the champagne, and you are already planning the divorce. This is what I am talking about. You are incapable of just being happy." "I am pragmatic," I said, cutting a piece of steak. "You are worth $50 million on paper. Her family has influence. A prenup protects both of you. It is standard business practice." "It is a marriage, not a merger," Julian snapped. "In your tax bracket, it is both," I countered. Elena reached over and touched Julian's hand. "Don't listen to him, sweetheart. He is just... You know how he is. This is wonderful news. We are so proud of you." I watched them from across the table. They looked like a perfect mother and son. I was the dark cloud in the corner, the dinosaur, the man who signed the checks and read the fine print. The wedding planning began in earnest the following week. It was immediately clear that this was not going to be a celebration of love. It was going to be a coronation. Julian was obsessed with how the event would look on social media and in the society pages. He wanted to project the image of a man who had arrived. I continued to go to work at Vanguard Alith Solutions during the day, analyzing failing companies, and then came home to work on Aerostream's books at night. I watched the expenses for the wedding start to roll in. $10,000 for a florist deposit, $15,000 for a venue reservation. Julian was using his personal draw from the company to pay for it, which was legal, but he was draining his liquidity at an alarming rate. I kept my mouth shut. I decided I would play the role of the supportive stepfather. I would be the silent banker, the rock in the background. I told myself that once the wedding was over, Julian would settle down. I told myself that the stress of the wedding was making him more irritable than usual. I was wrong. I was looking at the data, but I was ignoring the human element. I was ignoring the fact that Julian was not just stressed. He was ashamed. He was ashamed of his humble beginnings. He was ashamed that his success was built on the back of a man who wore suits from a department store and drove a 5-year-old sedan. He wanted to fit into Clarissa's world, and in that world, people like me were the help, not the family. I did not know it then, but the machinery of my exclusion had already begun to turn. I was still signing the guarantee documents for the refinancing of our third warehouse, putting my credit score on the chopping block to expand his empire, while he was already discussing with Clarissa how to minimize my presence on his big day. I was the architect of his castle, meticulously placing every stone and calculating every load-bearing wall. But the king had decided that the architect was no longer welcome in the throne room. He just had not found the courage to tell me yet. But I am a man who notices details. I notice when conversations stop as I enter a room. I notice when phone calls are taken outside. I notice when the respect in a man's eyes is replaced by tolerance, and then by contempt. The dinosaur was about to wake up. And the thing about dinosaurs is that when they move, the earth shakes. The check sat on the kitchen island, a rectangular slip of paper worth $200,000. I had written it out in my neat block-letter handwriting that morning. To me, that sum represented 4 years of tuition at a private university, or the down payment on a substantial property, or a safety net for a rainy decade. It was real money earned through decades of staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned and making hard decisions that kept companies afloat. I slid it across the marble surface toward Julian. "This is for the wedding," I said. "Use it for the catering or the venue. Whatever helps take the pressure off." Julian was scrolling through his phone, his thumb flicking upward in a rhythmic, hypnotic motion. He glanced at the check for perhaps half a second. He did not pick it up. He did not look me in the eye. He just tapped the corner of the paper with his index finger, as if he were shooing away a fly. "Thanks," he said, his voice flat. "We can probably use this to upgrade the champagne tower. Clarissa wanted the vintage Dom Perignon, and the budget was getting tight on the alcohol." He went back to his phone. There was no hug. There was no moment of shared gratitude. There was not even a pause in his scrolling. I stood there watching my $200,000 be mentally converted into bubbles that would be consumed and forgotten in 45 minutes. I felt a coldness start to settle in my chest, a sensation I usually reserved for reading bankruptcy filings. It was the feeling of realizing that the asset you are investing in has absolutely no yield. But the indifference was manageable. I was used to being the silent utility provider. What I was not used to, and what I had not calculated for, was the arrival of the variable named Richard. Richard was Julian's biological father. He had vanished to Europe 20 years ago, leaving behind a mountain of debt and a heartbroken 10-year-old boy. For 2 decades, his contribution to Julian's life had been a zero. He had sent no birthday cards, no child support checks, and no phone calls. But the moment Julian's face started appearing in business magazines, Richard miraculously reappeared. He walked into our lives on a Tuesday evening, wearing a linen suit that was slightly too tight and carrying a leather valise that looked expensive from a distance, but showed cracks in the handle up close. He was tanned, smiling, and possessed a voice that sounded like it had been marinated in scotch and cigarettes. "My boy," Richard had bellowed, spreading his arms wide in the entryway of the house I paid for. "Look at you! You are a titan, a captain of industry. I always knew you had my genes." Julian melted. That is the only way to describe it. The sharp, arrogant young CEO who negotiated hard with trucking unions simply dissolved into a puddle of desperate affection. He hugged the man who had abandoned him, as if Richard were a war hero returning from the front lines. From that night on, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Richard was ostensibly staying at a hotel, but he was at our dinner table every single night. He told stories about running art galleries in Milan and investing in vineyards in Bordeaux. I sat at the head of the table, cutting my roast beef and listening to the inconsistencies. He claimed to have sold a gallery in 2010, but later mentioned he was living in a hostel in Prague that same year. He talked about vintage cars he owned, but I noticed he always asked Julian to call him an Uber. But Julian did not care about the math. He was intoxicated by the narrative. Richard was the father he had fantasized about, the cool, worldly rogue. I was just the man who taught him how to file his taxes. The distinction became painfully public at the engagement cocktail party a week later. It was held at a rooftop bar downtown, a place where the cocktails cost $25 and tasted like herbs and pretension. Julian was holding court in the center of the room, Clarissa on his arm. I stood near the periphery, holding a club soda, watching the room dynamics. Julian waved Richard over. He put his arm around Richard's shoulders and beamed at the gathering crowd of young professionals and socialites. "Everyone, you have to meet my father, Richard," Julian announced, his voice booming with pride. "The man is a legend. He just flew in from France. He is the one who taught me that you have to take big risks to get big rewards. He is the inspiration behind the hustle." Applause rippled through the room. Richard gave a modest little bow, soaking it up like a dry sponge in water. Then, someone in the circle asked about me. A young woman pointed in my direction. "And who is that gentleman over there, Julian?" Julian glanced at me. For a split second I saw a flicker of hesitation. Then he shrugged. "Oh, that is Thomas," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave. "He is my stepfather. He helps us out with the accounting. He is the guy who makes sure we do not get audited." A few polite chuckles. The accountant. The help. The IRS shield. I took a sip of my club soda. It tasted bitter. I had built the engine of his Ferrari, and he was introducing me as the guy who wipes the windshield. However, reality has a way of intruding on fantasies, and while Julian was playing the role of the playboy heir, his company was bleeding. 3 nights after that party, while Julian and Richard were out tasting scotches, the red alert light on my home server began to blink. I went down to my basement office. The Nexus system, the proprietary software I had written and legally owned, was throwing critical error flags. I pulled up the code and felt my stomach drop. There was a routing conflict in the hazardous materials module. Due to a recent update pushed by one of Julian's innovative new junior developers, the system was routing trucks carrying Class A flammables through prohibited residential zones in 3 different states. This was not just a bug. This was a catastrophe. If a Department of Transportation audit caught this, the fines would be astronomical. If an accident happened, the liability would bankrupt the company and likely send the executives to prison. Julian was not answering his phone. I called him 4 times. Nothing. I had a choice. I could let it burn. I could let the error stand and watch the regulatory agencies tear Aerostream apart. It would have been a quick lesson in reality for the boy king. But I looked at the screen at the company I had poured my retirement into, and my professional instincts took over. I could not let the structure collapse. I brewed a pot of black coffee. I cracked my knuckles. I sat down and began to recode the routing algorithm. I worked for 72 hours straight. I did not sleep. I barely ate. I lived in the glow of 3 monitors tracing the spaghetti code the junior developer had vomited into my clean architecture, excising the cancer line by line. I rerouted 400 active shipments manually, while rewriting the automated protocol in the background. By the time the sun came up on the 4th day, the system was clean. The trucks were on legal routes. The compliance logs were patched. I had saved Aerostream approximately $2 million in potential federal fines and incalculable reputational damage. My eyes were red-rimmed and my back felt like it was fused into a single rod of pain. I took a shower, put on a fresh suit, and drove to the custom tailor shop where I knew Julian was having his final fitting. I needed to tell him what had happened. He needed to know that his innovation almost killed his company. I walked into the shop. It smelled of cedar and expensive wool. Julian stood on a podium wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a glove. Richard was sitting in a leather armchair nearby, sipping an espresso, looking like the lord of the manor. "Julian," I said, my voice rasping from 3 days of silence. "We need to talk, now." Julian looked at me in the mirror. He frowned, adjusting his bow tie. "Jesus, Thomas, you look like hell." "Have you slept?" "No," I said. "I have not. I spent the last 3 nights fixing a critical routing failure in Nexus. Your new update routed hazmat trucks through school zones. I patched it, but we need to fire that junior developer and audit the entire update protocol. You were exposed to $2 million in fines." I waited for the shock. I waited for the gratitude. I waited for him to step down from the podium and ask for details. Instead, Julian sighed. He turned to the tailor. "Does this lapel look too wide to you?" "Julian," I said, sharper this time. "Did you hear me? I just saved your company from a federal investigation." Julian turned around exasperated. "Thomas, not now." "Okay, I am in the middle of something important here. This is my wedding tuxedo. Can you please stop being the doomsday prophet for 5 minutes? You always do this. You exaggerate everything to make yourself feel essential." Richard chuckled from the armchair. "Let the boy breathe, Tom. Business can wait. Style is eternal." I looked at Richard. Then I looked at Julian. "It is not exaggeration," I said quietly. "It is math, and the math says you were lucky." "Yeah, well, thanks for the fix," Julian said dismissively, waving a hand. "Send me an email about it. I will read it after the honeymoon. Now, do you think I should go with the midnight blue or the black?" I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the last 3 days pressing down on me. I nodded slowly. "I will send an email," I said. I turned and walked out. He did not watch me go. When I got home, I found Elena in the living room. She was looking at travel brochures for Italy. "Oh, Thomas, you are back," she said, not looking up. "Richard was telling us about this villa in Tuscany. He thinks we should all go next summer. He says he can get us a deal." "Elena," I said, sitting heavily on the sofa. "Julian almost lost the company this week." She finally looked at me. Her expression was one of mild annoyance, not concern. "Oh, Thomas, why do you always have to be so dramatic? Julian knows what he is doing. He is a CEO. He is a child playing with loaded guns," I said. "And Richard is feeding him ammunition." Elena's face hardened. Richard is his father. He brings life to this family, Thomas. He makes Julian smile. When was the last time you made Julian smile? All you do is bring home spreadsheets and worry. You are so heavy. Richard is light. We need light right now. Light does not pay the mortgage, Elena, I said. And light does not keep the trucks on the road. Maybe not, she snapped. But it is a lot more fun to be around. She stood up and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the silence. The final blow came 2 days later. We were having a family meeting to finalize the guest list. Clarissa was there tapping away on a tablet. The list was projected onto the television screen in the living room. I scanned the names. I was looking for Saul, my lawyer, who had helped incorporate AeroStream for free back in the day. I was looking for Marcus and Jim, 2 logistics veterans, who had invested the first $50,000, based solely on my handshake. These were men who had mentored Julian, men who had bought him lunch when he was a broke 24-year-old with a dream. Their names were gone. Where is Saul? I asked, pointing at the screen. And Marcus and Jim? Clarissa didn't even look up from her tablet. Oh, we had to make some cuts, Thomas. The venue has a hard cap of 200 people. You cut the founding investors, I asked, my voice rising. To make room for who? Well, Clarissa said, her voice dripping with that polite condescension that only the very rich can master. My father needs to invite the senator and his staff, and Richard has some business associates from Europe coming in. We need to prioritize people who fit the aesthetic of the event. The aesthetic, I repeated. Saul has known Julian since he was 10. Marcus saved Julian's hide when the first warehouse flooded. They are just business contacts, Thomas, Julian said from the corner where he was texting. They are your friends, really, not mine. It would be awkward for them anyway. They would not know anyone. I am paying for this wedding, I said. I rarely used money as a weapon, but I was backed into a corner. I think I should get a say in who attends. Julian finally looked up. His eyes were cold. Actually, Thomas Richard offered to chip in for the bar tab. So it is not just you paying. And honestly, if you are going to hold the money over my head, maybe we should just return your check. We want people there who support us, not people who think they bought a ticket to control us. He did not return the check, of course. That money was already spent. But the message was clear. The people who built the foundation were being jackhammered out to make room for the people who looked good in the photographs. I looked at the screen again. The guest list was a roster of strangers and sycophants. My history with the boy and the history of the men who helped him had been deleted with a few keystrokes. Fine, I said. It is your day. I stood up and went to the basement. I did not work that night. I sat in the dark listening to the hum of the server that held the heart of his company, the server that belonged to me. The rifts were no longer cracks. They were canyons. And I was standing on one side, watching them dance on the other, unaware that the ground beneath their feet was held up by a single pillar. A pillar they were busy chipping away at with chisels made of arrogance and greed. They wanted me to be the invisible man. I decided right then and there that I would grant their wish. But first, I had to survive the dinner. The restaurant was named L'Apogée, a place where the lighting was so dim you needed the flashlight on your phone to read the menu, and the prices were high enough to feed a family of 4 for a month on a single appetizer. I sat at the head of the circular table, my back straight against the velvet banquette. To my right sat Elena, looking radiant in a dress I had paid for. To my left sat Julian and Clarissa holding hands on top of the tablecloth. And directly across from me, occupying the seat of honor that physically dominated the conversation, was Richard. The waiter arrived with a bottle of Cabernet that cost $600. I nodded at him to pour. I was the one paying for this dinner, a celebration of the finalization of the wedding plans. I was the wallet, the silent engine that kept the lights on and the wine flowing. But as the crimson liquid filled the glasses, I felt less like a patriarch and more like a ghost haunting my own life. Richard was in rare form tonight. He was leaning back in his chair, swirling his wine with a theatrical flair that suggested he had spent decades in the drawing rooms of Europe, rather than dodging debt collectors. He was talking about a new venture, something vague involving blockchain and sustainable luxury resorts in the Maldives. "It is all about the narrative," Richard said, his voice a smooth baritone that carried easily over the soft jazz playing in the background. "Investors do not buy bricks and mortar anymore, Julian. They buy the dream. They buy the lifestyle. You have to sell them the feeling of sand between their toes before you even break ground." That is what I learned in Monte Carlo. Julian was leaning forward, his chin resting on his hand, staring at his biological father with an expression of rapt adoration. It was the look of a starving man watching someone describe a banquet. "That is brilliant," Julian breathed. "Sell the feeling. I have been so focused on the logistics on the hard data. I need to think bigger, like you." I took a sip of water. The hard data was the only reason Julian had a company to think about. The logistics were the reason he could afford the suit he was wearing. But I said nothing. I cut my sea bass with surgical precision, keeping my eyes on the plate. "Exactly," Richard continued, gesturing with his fork. "You are an artist, my boy. Business is just the canvas. Do not let the small minds drag you down with details about margins and regulations. That is for the little people. You are a visionary, like me." He winked at me when he said, "little people." It was not subtle. It was a direct shot across the bow. I felt a muscle in my jaw tighten. I wanted to ask him which visionary principle he had used when he abandoned his 10-year-old son to run off with a cocktail waitress. I wanted to ask him if the sand between his toes in the Maldives was worth the 20 years of trauma he had inflicted on the boy sitting next to him. But I remained silent. I was the stepfather, the stabilizer. I was not supposed to cause scenes. The main course was cleared, and the waiter brought out a dessert menu. Julian waved it away. He looked nervous suddenly. He exchanged a glance with Clarissa, then with Elena. There was a silent communication happening, a frequency I was not tuned into. "Actually," Julian started, clearing his throat. "Before we order dessert, there is something we wanted to discuss. About the ceremony." I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin and placed it on the table. "I thought the schedule was finalized," I said. "The rehearsal is on Friday. The ceremony is at 4 on Saturday." "The timing is the same," Clarissa said, her voice sugary sweet but brittle. "It is just the roles. We have been thinking a lot about the flow of the ceremony. We want it to tell a story." "A story," I repeated. "Right," Julian said, gaining confidence. "The theme is legacy and future. We want to highlight where I came from and where I am going. So we decided to make a change to the parent tribute." He took a breath. "I have asked Richard to stand with me at the altar," Julian said. "He is going to give the opening toast, the blessing of the ancestors, and he will be the one to formally present me to Clarissa's family during the exchange of vows." The air left the table. It was as if someone had opened an airlock and vented the atmosphere into space. I looked at Julian. Then I looked at Richard, who was studying his fingernails with a look of practiced modesty. "The parent tribute," I said slowly. "That is the part where the father acknowledges the groom's maturity. It is the part where the father welcomes the new daughter." "Yes," Julian said. "And you want Richard to do it?" I said. "He is my father, Thomas," Julian said, his voice rising slightly in defense. "It makes sense symbolically. It is about lineage." I felt a cold numbness spreading through my limbs. "I see. And what is my role, Julian? Where do I stand while Richard is blessing your lineage?" Silence descended on the table. It was thick and heavy. The clinking of silverware from other tables seemed miles away. Julian looked down at his empty plate. Clarissa took a sip of wine. Elena stared fixedly at the centerpiece of white roses. "Well," Julian said, his voice stumbling, "that is the thing. The altar area is quite small, and with the videography team needing clear sightlines, we thought it would be best if you were seated." "Seated," I said. "In the front row," Julian added quickly. "Or the second row, depending on how many of Clarissa's cousins confirm, but definitely near the front. You will be at the honorary guest table during the reception." "The honorary guest table," I said. "Not the family table." "The family table is for immediate family," Clarissa interjected. "Parents and siblings. Since you and Elena have different last names and since Richard is the biological father, it just gets complicated with the seating chart if we try to squeeze everyone in. We want the head table to look symmetrical for the photos." I turned my gaze to Clarissa. She was smiling, that frozen politician smile. "And speaking of photos," she continued, not waiting for my reaction, "there is one small request. The wedding has a very specific aesthetic. Great Gatsby meets modern luxury. Everyone in the official party is wearing custom Tom Ford. We noticed that your suits are, well, they are very practical, Thomas, but they are a bit dated, a bit loose in the shoulders." "You want me to buy a new suit?" I said. "No," Clarissa said. "We think it would be better if you were not in the official wedding party photos. You know, the ones that go in the album and the magazine announcement. We want a cohesive look. You can take plenty of candids at the reception, of course. But for the formal portraits, we want to keep it to the genetic lines. It is just cleaner that way." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, but my face remained impassive. I was a crisis manager. I did not panic. I assessed the damage. They were erasing me. They were not just sidelining me. They were editing me out of the history of the family. I was the man who had paid for the orthodontist to straighten Julian's teeth so he could smile for these photos. I was the man who had paid for the gym memberships so he could fit into that custom suit. And now, I was being told that I did not fit the aesthetic of the product I had manufactured. I turned to Elena. She was my wife. We had shared a bed for 18 years. I had held her when she cried after Richard left. I had paid off her debts. I had given her a life of leisure and security. "Elena," I said softly, "are you hearing this?" She finally looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but there was no steel in them. There was only a pleading weakness. "Thomas, please," she whispered. "Do not make this difficult. It is his day. He wants his father there. Richard has been gone for so long. They are just trying to make up for lost time. Can't you just be the bigger person? You always say you don't care about the spotlight." "It is not about the spotlight, Elena," I said. "It is about respect. They are asking me to sit in the audience at my own son's wedding while the man who abandoned him takes the credit for raising him." "He is not your son, Thomas," Elena said. The words hung in the air like smoke. She had said it. The thing we never said. "I mean," she corrected herself hastily, "he loves you. You know that. But Richard is his blood. You can't fight biology, Thomas. Just sit down, clap, and enjoy the expensive dinner. Why does it always have to be a battle with you?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized that I did not know this woman. Or perhaps I did, and I had just chosen to ignore the reality for 18 years. She was not malicious. She was just weak. She was attracted to shiny things, and right now, Richard and this wedding were the shiniest things in her universe. I was just the dull, gray support beam that held the roof up. I turned back to Julian. He was watching me with a mixture of defiance and guilt. "So," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor that was shaking my hands beneath the table. "Let me clarify the parameters of this arrangement. I pay for the wedding. I pay for the dinner. I pay for the open bar. But I do not stand with you. I do not sit at the family table. And I do not appear in the photographs because I ruin the aesthetic. You are making it sound worse than it is, Julian snapped. It is just logistics, Thomas. You love logistics. This is not logistics, I said. This is an insult. Julian slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. This is exactly why I didn't want you involved, he hissed. You are so rigid. You are so transactional. You think because you wrote some checks you own me. You think because you taught me how to read a balance sheet, you are my father. I taught you how to be a man, Julian, I said quietly. No, Julian said, his voice dripping with venom. You taught me how to be a boring, safe middle management drone. Richard taught me how to dream. Richard has the fire. You just have the fire extinguisher. He leaned in close, his face contorted with a cruelty I had never seen before. Honestly, Thomas, he said, if you are going to sit there with that sour look on your face judging everyone, maybe you shouldn't come at all. If you feel so uncomfortable, don't come. Nobody is forcing you. Julian, Elena gasped. Don't say that. No, I mean it, Julian said, not looking at his mother. He was locked onto me. This day is about honoring my roots. It is about honoring my legacy. My real legacy. You have been a great manager, Thomas. You really have. You ran the household efficiently. You kept the books balanced. But let us be honest about what this is. You are not my source. You are not my origin. You are just the guy who filled in the gap. The restaurant went silent around me. The waiter arrived with the dessert tray, saw the look on my face, and immediately turned around and walked away. I sat there for a long moment. I looked at Richard, who was smirking slightly, enjoying the show. I looked at Clarissa, who was checking her reflection in her spoon. I looked at Elena, who was weeping silently into her napkin, but doing absolutely nothing to defend me. And I looked at Julian, the boy I had carried to bed when he fell asleep on the couch, the boy I had taught to drive the boy whose empire I had built with my own 2 hands. He was right. I was not his source. I was just the guy who filled in the gap. But what Julian failed to understand in his infinite arrogance was that when you remove the thing that fills the gap, the structure collapses. He thought he was standing on a mountain of his own making. He did not realize he was standing on a scaffolding I had erected bolt by bolt, and he had just ordered me to dismantle it. I understand, I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. You do. Julian looked surprised. He had expected a fight. He had expected me to yell. Yes, I said. I understand perfectly. You want to honor your true legacy. You want a wedding that reflects the reality of your success and your lineage. You want to remove the manager from the equation so the visionaries can shine? Exactly, Julian said, relaxing. He smiled, relieved. I knew you would get it eventually. It is nothing personal, Thomas. It is just business. It is just branding. Just branding, I repeated. I signaled the waiter. He approached cautiously. The check, please, I said. Thomas, you don't have to leave yet, Elena said. We haven't had coffee. I have lost my appetite, I said. The waiter placed the black leather folder on the table. The bill was $1,200. I pulled out my black American Express card, the one that was linked to the main operating account of the family trust, and placed it on the tray. I will see you at home, Elena, I said. Wait, Julian said. So we are good. You are okay with the changes. I stood up. I buttoned my dated suit jacket. I looked down at my stepson and, for the first time in 18 years, I did not see a son. I saw a liability. I saw a bad investment that needed to be written off. You were clear, Julian, I said. You want me to know my place. I know my place now. Enjoy the dessert. I walked out of the restaurant without looking back. The air outside was cold, but it felt clean. Inside, they were likely toasting to their victory, to the successful marginalization of the old dinosaur. They thought the conversation was over. They thought they had won. They had no idea that the conversation had just begun. They thought I was walking away defeated. In reality, I was walking away to initialize the liquidation protocols. Julian wanted to honor his source, fine. I would leave him with exactly what his source, Richard, had given him: absolutely nothing. I got into my car, but I did not drive home. I drove toward the gleaming glass tower of the Aerostream headquarters. There was work to be done. The drive from the restaurant to the Aerostream headquarters was not a journey of sorrow. It was a journey of clarification. I did not turn on the radio. I did not call anyone. I simply listened to the tires humming against the asphalt and the rhythmic beat of the windshield wipers clearing away a light drizzle that had begun to fall. For the last 14 years, and especially the last 18 with Elena, I had been operating under a fundamental misconception. I had believed I was a husband and a father. I had believed that the emotional equity I had invested in this family would compound over time, yielding a return of respect and companionship in my old age. I was wrong. As I merged onto the highway, watching the city lights blur into streaks of neon, the analyst in me took over. I stripped away the sentimental veneer and looked at the core data. I was not a father. I was a financial instrument. I was a bond that had been issued to cover a deficit in their lives. I was a zero-coupon bond. I had required no maintenance. I had provided stability. And now that I had reached maturity, they were discarding the certificate because they had found a shinier, more volatile currency in Richard. The most damning data point was not Julian's arrogance. It was Elena's silence. That silence in the restaurant was deafening. It was a breach of contract. Marriage at its structural level is a partnership agreement. It implies a mutual defense pact. When Julian attacked my dignity, Elena had a fiduciary duty to intervene. She did not. She watched me be devalued and liquidated, and she chose to align herself with the new management. She had made a calculation that her social standing and her relationship with her son were more valuable than her loyalty to her husband. She had chosen the winning side, or at least what she perceived to be the winning side. I pulled into the underground parking garage of the Aerostream Tower. The security guard, a young man named Davis, looked up from his monitor and waved. I waved back. He had no idea that the man driving the 10-year-old sedan was about to pull the structural supports out from under the building above him. The office was silent. The open-plan floor, usually buzzing with logistics coordinators and sales reps, was a graveyard of dark monitors and empty chairs. I walked past Julian's corner office. Through the glass walls, I could see his desk cluttered with wedding magazines and fabric swatches. A bottle of expensive scotch sat on the credenza. It was a tableau of a CEO who had forgotten that the E stands for executive, not emperor. I went to my office in the back. It was smaller, windowless, and efficient. I closed the door and locked it. Then I knelt before the floor safe concealed behind a filing cabinet. I spun the dial. Left to 32, right to 14, left to 63. The tumblers clicked into place with a satisfying mechanical heavy sound. I pulled the heavy steel door open and reached into the back past the emergency cache and the backup hard drives. I pulled out a black expandable file folder. On the tab written in my own hand 10 years ago were the words, Omega Protocol. In my line of work, you never enter a burning building without knowing where the exits are. And you never build a system without a kill switch. I had created the Omega Protocol, not because I expected to use it, but because probability dictates that all systems eventually fail. I had hoped this file would gather dust until I died. I had hoped I would shred it on my deathbed, happy and loved. But hope is not a strategy. I sat at my desk and opened the file. Inside were the foundational documents of my entire existence with this family. I began the review, my mind shifting gears from aggrieved stepfather to forensic auditor. First, I turned my attention to the financial health of Aerostream. I logged into the master admin account. I had built this network. I had the skeleton keys. I bypassed the user-level permissions and went straight to the general ledger. I had been suspicious of the cash flow for weeks, but I had attributed the irregularities to wedding expenses. Now, looking at the raw data without the filter of affection, I saw the pattern immediately. I ran a query for all vendor payments made in the last 60 days that were under the threshold for mandatory secondary approval. I filtered for new vendors. One name popped up 17 times: RB Strategic Consulting. The payments were structured carefully. $8,000 here, $9,500 there. Always just under the $10,000 limit that would trigger a flag for review. I drilled down into the vendor details. The address for RB Strategic Consulting was a P.O. box in a strip mall 3 towns over. I cross-referenced the tax identification number. It was a shell company registered 45 days ago. RB, I whispered to the empty room. Richard Bennett. Julian was funneling company money to his biological father. I pulled up the invoices attached to the payments. They were laughable. Consulting on brand synergy. Advisory services for European expansion. There were no deliverables, no reports, no timesheets. This was not just an allowance. This was embezzlement. Julian was taking funds from a corporation that had investors and bank loans, and he was siphoning it to a non-employee for non-existent services. He was piercing the corporate veil. He was exposing himself and, by extension, me as the guarantor to criminal liability for fraud. A cold smile touched my lips. Julian wanted to talk about legacy. His legacy was currently a felony. I printed every single transaction. I downloaded the digital trail, including the IP addresses used to authorize the payments. They all came from Julian's laptop. The evidence was irrefutable. Next, I turned to the intellectual property. I opened the subfile labeled Nexus Licensing. Years ago, when I wrote the code for the Nexus logistics platform, I had been careful. I knew that intellectual property is the only asset that truly matters in a tech-enabled business. Trucks depreciate. Warehouses can be leased. But the code is the brain. I pulled out the original licensing agreement. It was a document I had drafted myself, and while Julian had signed it, I doubt he had ever read it. He had been too busy picking out the color of the company logo. The agreement stated that Thomas Martinez, the licensor, granted Aerostream Logistics, the licensee, a revocable, non-exclusive, royalty-free license to use the Nexus source code. Clause 7, Section B was the kill shot. It read, "The licensor reserves the right to terminate this license immediately and without prior notice. If, in the sole discretion of the licensor, the licensee engages in conduct that poses a reputational risk to the licensor, or if the licensee demonstrates financial mismanagement that jeopardizes the integrity of the intellectual property." I looked at the stack of printed evidence regarding the embezzlement. Financial mismanagement check. Reputational risk check. Julian thought the software was his birthright. He thought because he used it every day he owned it. He did not understand the difference between possession and title. He was a tenant living in a house I built, and he had just violated the lease. Finally, I opened the file on the house. The beautiful Victorian home in North Vancouver, where Elena was currently sleeping, likely dreaming of her Italian vacation with Richard. The deed was not in my name. It was not in Elena's name. It was held by the Martinez Family Trust. I reviewed the trust indenture. I was the sole trustee. I had absolute discretion over the assets. Elena was a conditional beneficiary. The conditions were specific. I had drafted them to protect her in case of my death, but also to protect myself in case of this. Clause 14. The trustee shall have the power to sell, liquidate, or encumber any real property held by the trust at any time, for any reason, without the consent of the beneficiaries. Clause 14 continued, the right of any beneficiary to reside in real property held by the trust is revocable at the will of the trustee. I sat back in my chair. The office air conditioning hummed a low mechanical sound that felt like the heartbeat of the building. The picture was complete. Julian and Elena thought they held all the cards. They thought they had the youth, the beauty, the social standing, and the true family connection. They thought I was just the old wallet easily discarded once the bill was paid. They did not realize that they were standing on a trapdoor. They had insulted me. That was painful, but it was survivable. They had used me. That was humiliating but common. But by stealing from the company I guaranteed, and by jeopardizing my financial future to fund their fantasy life with Richard, they had threatened my survival. And that was the line. I was no longer a father grieving a lost relationship. I was an organism engaging in self-preservation. In the wild, when a predator tries to eat you, you do not try to reason with it. You do not ask it to remember all the good times you had. You make yourself indigestible. You make yourself toxic. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. The wedding was in 4 days. I picked up my pen. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen that Julian had given me for Christmas, 5 years ago, back when he still looked at me with respect. I uncapped it. I pulled a fresh legal pad toward me and wrote a single word at the top: execution. I would not scream. I would not make a scene. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose my composure. I would simply pull the levers of the machine I had built. I reached for the phone and dialed the private number of my personal attorney, Saul. I knew he would be asleep. I did not care. Saul was one of the men Julian had cut from the guest list. Saul would understand. The phone rang 4 times. Then a groggy voice answered. "Thomas, it is 3 in the morning. Is everything all right?" "No, Saul," I said, my voice steady and cold as the liquid nitrogen flowing through my veins. "Everything is wrong, but we are going to fix it. I need you to draft some documents, and I need you to prepare a filing for the county clerk's office regarding the house." "The house?" Saul sounded confused. "Are you selling?" "I am liquidating," I said. "And Saul, prepare a notice of breach for the bank regarding the Aerostream commercial loans. I am invoking the material adverse change clause." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Saul was a smart man. He knew what that meant. He knew it was the nuclear option. "Thomas," he said softly, "if you do that, the call provisions kick in. The bank will freeze everything. It will kill the company. Julian will be ruined." "Julian ruined himself when he decided to start embezzling funds to pay his deadbeat father," I said. "I am just the auditor closing the file." "Embezzlement," Saul's voice sharpened. "Are you sure?" "I am looking at the wire transfers right now," I said. "RB, Strategic Consulting, $50,000 in 6 weeks. "Okay," Saul said. The sleep was gone from his voice. He was wide awake now. "Okay. If that is the case, you have to act. If you don't, you are complicit." "Exactly," I said. "I am acting. I am protecting myself. I am initiating the Omega Protocol." "I will get the coffee," Saul said. "Meet me at my office in an hour." "I will be there," I said. I hung up the phone. I looked around my small, windowless office one last time. This was where I had spent nights worrying about Julian's future. This was where I had saved his company a dozen times. I closed the black binder. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. The sadness was gone. The grief was gone. In its place was a crystalline clarity. I walked out of the office, leaving the lights off. The darkness did not bother me anymore. I was the one who controlled the switch. The art of war, as Sun Tzu famously wrote, is based on deception. When you are strong, appear weak. When you are near, appear far. And when you are about to dismantle a $50 million logistics company from the inside out, appear to be a defeated old man, accepting his obsolescence. The morning after the disastrous dinner at l'Apogée, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm coffee and drafted an email to Julian. I spent 45 minutes crafting it. I deleted sentences that sounded too dignified and replaced them with phrases that sounded submissive. I wanted to sound like a man who had been beaten into submission. Subject regarding the wedding. Dear Julian, I have thought a lot about what you said last night. You are right. This is your day, and it should reflect the image you want to project. I do not want to be a distraction or a source of tension. Therefore, I will respect your wishes. I will not attend the ceremony or the reception. I will simply stay home. Please tell Clarissa I am sorry for any stress I caused. I hope you have a wonderful wedding. Love, Thomas. I pressed send. Then I waited. The response came less than 10 minutes later. It was a text message, not a phone call. Thanks, Thomas. Glad you understand. It is just better this way. We will send you photos. That was it. No, I will miss you. No, I am sorry it came to this. Just a casual dismissal, like confirming a rescheduled dentist appointment. I walked into the living room where Elena was flipping through a bridal magazine. She looked up, her face bright with relief. Julian had evidently forwarded her the email. "Oh, Thomas," she said, offering me a sad, patronizing smile. "I think you made the right choice. It is very noble of you. We will miss you, of course, but it will be so much less awkward for Richard this way. And you can have a nice, quiet weekend to yourself. Maybe go fishing." "Yes," I said, keeping my face perfectly neutral. "I might go fishing. And, Thomas," she added, her eyes drifting back to the magazine. "Since you are not coming, do you think we could redirect the budget for your meal and see toward the floral arrangements? Clarissa really wants a wall of white hydrangeas for the photo booth." "Do whatever you want," I said. "The check has already cleared." "You are a dear," she said. "They thought I was broken. They thought I was a harmless ATM dispensing dinosaur who had accepted his extinction. They were wrong. I was not extinct. I was just moving underground." An hour later, I was sitting in the conference room of Saul's law firm. Saul was a man who wore suspenders and smoked cigars in a building that had been smoke-free since the 90s. He was the kind of lawyer you hired when you wanted to bury someone, not when you wanted to mediate. "You look calm," Saul noted, sliding a stack of documents across the mahogany table. "Too calm for a man whose family just spat in his face." "I am not calm, Saul," I said, picking up a pen. "I am efficient. Let us review the timeline." We started with the bank. This was the cornerstone of the demolition. Aerostream Logistics operated on a revolving line of credit of $10 million, plus 2 substantial term loans for the warehouse acquisitions. The interest rate on these loans was a prime beating 4%. That rate existed solely because I, Thomas Martinez, was the personal guarantor. My credit score of 850 and my personal assets were the collateral. Saul had drafted a formal notice of withdrawal of guarantee. "Here is how it works," Saul explained, tapping the document. "Under the covenants of the loan agreement, the bank requires a guarantor with a net worth exceeding $5 million to remain on the file. If you withdraw, it triggers an immediate, material adverse change event. The bank is legally required to reassess the risk profile of the borrower." "And without me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Without you, Julian is a high-risk borrower with a short credit history and a debt-to-equity ratio that looks like a horror movie," Saul said. "The bank will have 2 options. 1, they can call the loan immediately demanding full repayment within 24 hours. Or 2, they can invoke the penalty interest rate clause." "Which is 18%, Saul said. "Plus monthly penalty fees. It will jump from 4% to 18% overnight. On a $10 million principal, that is a monthly interest payment increase that will bleed them dry in a quarter. But realistically, the bank will just freeze the accounts. They do not like risk." "Good," I said. "Send the notice via certified courier. I want it to arrive on the desk of the senior loan officer at 9 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, the day of the wedding." "That is theatrical," Saul said, raising an eyebrow. "It is precise," I corrected. "I want the financial collapse to align with the exchange of vows. It is poetic." I signed the document. Next, we moved to my personal assets. I had spent the previous night identifying every single stock and bond I held in my own name that was not tied up in the trust. I had a significant portfolio of satellite stocks in various tech companies. Sell them, I told Saul. All of them. Today. The market is down slightly, Saul warned. You will take a hit. I do not care about a 5% loss, I said. I care about liquidity. Sell them and wire the proceeds to the account we opened in the Cayman Islands. It is perfectly legal, Saul reminded me, as if reassuring himself. Tax compliance is fully handled. You are just moving your own money to an offshore jurisdiction for asset protection. Exactly, I said. If Julian or Elena tries to sue me for breach of fiduciary duty, or some other nonsense when the company crashes, I want my war chest to be somewhere they cannot freeze it. I want to be judgment-proof. We initiated the transfers. $1.2 million moved from Vancouver to Georgetown in the blink of an eye. I felt lighter. The third item on the agenda was the most lethal operational strike: insurance. In the logistics industry, a truck is just a pile of metal, unless it has a certificate of insurance. Every major client, Amazon, Walmart, Costco, requires proof of active liability insurance before they will allow a truck to dock at their bays. If that insurance lapses for even 1 second, the contract is breached and the truck is turned away. I was the authorized officer on the insurance policy for Aerostream. I picked up the phone in Saul's office and called our broker, a man named Gary. Gary, I said. It is Thomas Martinez. Thomas, how are you? Gary chirped. Ready for the big wedding. I am not going to the wedding, Gary, I said. And neither is Aerostream. I beg your pardon. I am canceling the commercial general liability policy and the cargo insurance policy effective immediately, I said. There was a stunned silence on the line. Thomas, you can't do that. If you cancel, the fleet is grounded. You will be in breach of every service level agreement you have. The penalties from Amazon alone will be thousands of dollars an hour. I am aware of the penalties, I said. But as the policyholder who pays the premiums, I am exercising my right to cancel. The company is undergoing a restructuring. We will not be needing coverage this weekend. Does Julian know about this? Gary asked, his voice trembling. Julian is the CEO, I said. He should know the status of his own insurance. If he doesn't, that is a management failure, not an insurance issue. Cancel it, Gary. Send the confirmation to my personal email. I hung up. You just paralyzed the fleet, Saul said softly. As soon as the national database updates on Saturday morning, every gate guard at every distribution center in North America will see a red flag next to Aerostream. They will turn the trucks around. Julian wants to drive the company, I said. Let us see how far he gets without gas. I left Saul's office around noon. The sun was shining, but the air felt cold. I drove home to the house that was no longer really my home. For the next 2 days, I lived like a ghost. I moved through the rooms, methodically erasing my presence. Elena was so busy with last-minute fittings and spa appointments that she didn't notice the gradual disappearance of my life. I packed my books. I packed my clothes. I packed the framed photo of my mother that sat on the bedside table. I did not take the furniture. I did not take the television. I wanted the house to look normal at a glance. I wanted them to come home after the wedding and feel the emptiness slowly, like a draft from a window left open. I moved the boxes into a storage unit I had rented under a shell name. Every time I taped a box shut, I felt another tether to this family snap. On Friday night, the night of the rehearsal dinner, the house was empty. Elena and Julian were staying at the resort. I was alone. I went down to the basement one last time. I sat in front of the server rack. The green lights blinked rhythmically, the heartbeat of the empire I had built. I logged into the Nexus command console. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the clicking sound echoing off the concrete walls. I was not just turning it off. That would be too simple. I was setting a timed execution. In the Linux operating system, there is a utility called a cron job. It is a time-based job scheduler. You tell the computer to do a specific task at a specific time, and it obeys without question. I typed in the command line 30106/usr/bin/python 3/scripts/license_revoke.py. Translated, this meant, at 10:30 in the morning on the 6th day of the week, Saturday, run the Python script named license revoke ... I opened the script file to review the code one last time ... It was elegant in its destruction. Step 1. Revoke the encryption keys for the database. This would lock all current data, making the client lists and delivery schedules unreadable gibberish. Step 2. Send a push notification to every driver's handheld device. The message would read, "License expired. Return to base immediately." Step 3. Send an automated email to the entire client list. The email would state that Aerostream Logistics was suspending operations due to licensing disputes and advise them to seek alternative carriers. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. This was 18 years of work. This was the college fund. This was the retirement plan. Then I remembered the dinner. I remembered Julian telling me I was just a manager. I remembered Elena telling me to just sit down and clap. I pressed enter. The cursor blinked, accepting the command. The trap was set. The bomb was ticking. I stood up and powered down my local monitor, leaving the server running. I walked upstairs, turned off the lights in the kitchen, and locked the front door. I got into my car and drove away. I checked into a generic hotel near the airport, a place where no one knew my name. I ordered room service, a club sandwich, and a beer. I slept better that night than I had in years. The silence in the hotel room was not lonely. It was peaceful. It was the silence of a man who knows that tomorrow the noise will not be his problem. Tomorrow the noise would belong to Julian. It was Thursday evening, exactly 48 hours before the scheduled destruction of my life's work. I was sitting in the living room of the house in North Vancouver, the house I had paid for, the house I had maintained, reading a book on Stoic philosophy. It was a cliché, perhaps, for a man in my position to be reading Marcus Aurelius while his world burned, but I found comfort in the idea that we cannot control what happens to us, only how we respond. The front door opened. It did not open with the respectful click of a latch being turned by a family member coming home. It banged open, hitting the wall stop with a violence that shook the framed photographs in the hallway. Julian marched in. He was flanked by Elena. They brought with them a gust of cold air and an energy that was manic, agitated, and deeply aggressive. Julian was holding a leather portfolio. His face was flushed, his eyes bright with a mixture of adrenaline and stress. "We need to get this done, now," Julian said, throwing the portfolio onto the coffee table. It slid across the glass surface and stopped inches from my book. I marked my page and closed the book slowly. I looked up at him. "Hello to you too, Julian. To what do I owe the pleasure? I thought we had agreed I would be invisible until the wedding was over." "This is business," Julian snapped. He loosened his tie. He looked like a man who had been awake for 3 days on a diet of caffeine and ambition. "Richard and I just got off a conference call with the new investors from Zurich, the group he brought in. They are ready to commit $20 million in capital injection. It takes Aerostream global." "Congratulations," I said. "I assume you vetted them. Did you run a background check on the source of funds?" "Stop it," Julian hissed. "Stop acting like you are the only one who knows how to read a due diligence report. Richard knows these people. They are legitimate, but there is a snag." "There is always a snag," I said. "They want the IP structure clean," Julian said. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "They saw the note in the audit about the Nexus software being licensed from you personally. They don't like it. They want the asset owned by the corporation. They won't wire the money until they see a deed of assignment." I looked at the portfolio. "So you want me to give you the code?" "I want you to sign it over," Julian said. "Tonight. Right now. We need to email the proof of transfer by morning European time to unlock the funds before the wedding." It is the perfect wedding gift, Thomas. It secures the future. The future, I repeated. And what about my security? That code is my leverage. It is the only thing ensuring that the bank does not come after my personal assets if you drive the company into a ditch. I am not going to drive it into a ditch, Julian shouted. His voice cracked. I am expanding it. Why do you have so little faith in me? I built this. You managed it, I corrected. I built it, Elena stepped forward. She was wearing a coat I had bought her for her last birthday, a cashmere piece that cost $3,000. She looked tired, but her expression was hard. Thomas, please, she said. Her voice was not pleading. It was demanding. Don't be difficult just to spite us. We know you are hurt about the wedding seating. We get it. But don't hold the company hostage because your feelings are bruised. This is Julian's legacy. My feelings are irrelevant, I said, standing up. This is a business transaction. You are asking me to give away an asset worth millions of dollars for zero consideration to a management team that has just effectively fired me from the family. We didn't fire you, Julian spat. We just asked you to know your place. And apparently your place is standing in the way of my success. He reached into the portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. Here, he said, thrusting them at me. Richard's lawyers drafted it. It is a standard IP assignment. You sign over all rights to Nexus, and in exchange the company agrees to indemnify you against future lawsuits. It is a fair deal. Just sign the damn papers, Thomas. I looked at the papers. I did not need to read them to know what they were. They were a robbery in legal font. If I signed those, I would lose the only stick I had left. I would be defenseless. No, I said softly. Julian froze. What? No, I said. I will not sign. The software belongs to me. It stays with me. The explosion was instantaneous. Julian's face turned a dark, ugly shade of red. He took a step toward me, his hands balled into fists. For a second, I thought he might actually strike me. You selfish old bastard, he snarled. The venom in his voice was so pure, it was almost impressive. You are just jealous. You are jealous because Richard came back and he is 10 times the man you are. He has vision. You are just a bean counter. You are a footnote in my life, Thomas. A footnote. Julian, Elena warned, touching his arm, but he shook her off. No, Mom. He needs to hear this, Julian yelled. He was right in my face now. I could smell the scotch on his breath. You are an outsider. You have always been an outsider. We let you in. We let you pretend to be part of this family. And now that we don't need your money anymore, you are trying to sabotage us. You are pathetic. He leaned in closer. Let me make something very clear to you, he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You are not coming to the wedding. You are not coming to the reception. In fact, if you show your face anywhere near the resort, security has been instructed to remove you. I gave them your photo, Thomas. I told them you are a disgruntled former employee. Do not embarrass me. Do not make me have you dragged out in handcuffs. I stood very still. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was the final severing of the last nerve ending that connected me to this boy. The pain was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard logic of the executioner. A disgruntled former employee, I said. Is that what I am? That is exactly what you are, Julian said. Now sign the papers or I swear to God I will make sure you never see Mom again. I looked at Elena. This was her moment. This was her chance to step in to slap her son across the face to tell him that he was speaking to the man who had saved them from poverty. Elena looked at me. She crossed her arms. Thomas, she said, and her voice was ice. Just sign it. What do you need the software for? You are 64 years old. You are going to be dead in 20 years. Julian has his whole life ahead of him. Why do you need to hoard everything until you go into the ground? It is greedy. Greedy, I said. I see. You did it for duty. Elena continued rewriting history in real time. You took care of us because it was the right thing to do. Don't start acting like we owe you a debt for doing what a man is supposed to do. If you love us, you will sign. If you don't sign, then we know you never really loved us. You just loved the control. There it was. The ultimate manipulation. The weaponization of love to extract value. It was masterfully done. Richard must have coached them well. I looked at them. Two people I had devoted my life to. And I realized they were not people anymore. They were targets. Okay, I said. The word hung in the air. Julian blinked. Okay. You are right, I said. I let my shoulders slump. I let my face sag into an expression of defeat. I am an old man. I don't need the code. I don't want to fight anymore. If this is what it takes to ensure Julian's future, I will do it. The tension in the room broke. Julian let out a loud exhale. Elena smiled a triumphant, cruel little smile. Finally, Julian said. I knew you would see reason. I need a pen, I said. Julian scrambled to find a pen in his jacket pocket. He handed me a sleek, gold-plated ballpoint. Here, sign on the last page. Initial the bottom of every other page. I walked over to the dining table. I laid the stack of documents down. My back was to them. I need a moment, I said. My hands are shaking. Take your time, old man, Julian said. Just get it done. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a single sheet of paper that I had been carrying with me for 3 days. It was a document Saul had prepared. It looked remarkably similar to the legal pages in Julian's stack. Same font, same spacing. But the title at the top read, Acknowledgement of Service. Notice of Immediate Termination of License Agreement. The text below it was simple. It stated that the undersigned acknowledged receipt of the formal notice, that the Nexus license was revoked effective immediately, and that any continued use of the software constituted willful infringement. Quickly, sleight of hand born of adrenaline, I slipped my document into the stack, placing it near the bottom, just above the signature page of their assignment deed. I fanned the pages out, so only the signature lines were visible. I signed the top documents, the meaningless cover sheets. Then I turned around. I have signed the transfer, I lied. But there is one more thing. There is a compliance form for the transfer of the encryption keys. Since the keys are digital assets, you need to sign to accept custody. Otherwise, the transfer is not valid in the eyes of the audit. Fine, whatever, Julian said. He walked over, impatient. Sign here, I said, pointing to the line on my hidden document. I covered the title with my hand, pretending to hold the paper steady. And here. Julian did not read it. He did not even look at the text. He saw a line, and he saw the prize at the end of it. He scribbled his signature aggressively. Done, he said. Are we good? We are good, I said. You have everything you deserve. Julian snatched the stack of papers, including my termination notice, which he had just legally acknowledged receiving. He shoved them back into the portfolio. Great, he said. I am going to scan these and send them to Zurich. Don't wait up for us, Thomas. We are going back to the hotel. We have a lot of celebrating to do. Goodbye, Thomas, Elena said. She didn't look back. She just followed her son and the money out the door. The door slammed shut. The house fell silent again. I stood there for a long minute, listening to the sound of Julian's car engine roaring to life and fading down the street. I looked down at my hand. I was still holding Julian's gold pen. I walked over to the trash can and dropped it in. They thought they had just secured the keys to the kingdom. In reality, Julian had just signed a confession that he knew the software was being taken away. When the system crashed on Saturday, he would not be able to claim ignorance. He would not be able to say it was a technical glitch. He had signed a paper acknowledging the termination. If he tried to sue, I would produce that document with his wet signature on it, proving that he knew he had no right to the code. It was a trap within a trap, and he had walked right into it because he was too arrogant to read the fine print. I looked around the living room. The furniture, the paintings, the rugs, it all looked like a stage set for a play that had been canceled. I took my phone out of my pocket. I dialed a number I had looked up earlier that day. "Van City Movers," a voice answered. "This is Thomas," I said. "I spoke to you earlier about an emergency job." "Yeah, the night shift," the dispatcher said. "Double rate. You sure about this? It is 8 o'clock at night." "I am sure," I said. "I want the premium package. Pack and move. Everything in the study, everything in the guest bedroom, and clear out the garage. We can have a crew there in 45 minutes, the man said. "Make it 30, I said. "I will pay extra." "You got it," I hung up. I walked into the kitchen. On the counter sat a bottle of wine Elena had opened days ago. It was half empty and had gone sour. I poured it down the sink. "Security will have your photo," I whispered to myself, repeating Julian's words. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of the predator who has just watched the prey step into the snare. "Don't worry, Julian," I said to the empty room. "I won't be at the wedding. But my presence will be felt. Oh, it will be felt." I went upstairs to pack the last of my things. I had work to do. By the time the sun came up, Thomas Martinez would not live here anymore. And by the time the sun went down on Saturday, neither would Julian's empire. Saturday morning broke with the kind of aggressive perfection that usually exists only in brochures for Caribbean vacations. The sky over the Okanagan Valley was a piercing, cloudless blue. The sun beat down on the vineyards, turning the rows of grapes into ribbons of green and gold. It was a day designed for a coronation. At the Whispering Pines Resort, the air smelled of imported orchids and expensive perfume. I knew this because I had seen the invoices. I knew that the string quartet setting up under the white gazebo cost $4,000 for 3 hours of work. I knew that the vintage champagne chilling in the silver buckets cost $300 a bottle. I knew that the security team patrolling the perimeter, holding photographs of my face, was costing $50 an hour per man. I was not there to smell the orchids or taste the champagne. I was 300 miles away, sitting in a rented bachelor apartment in East Vancouver that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and stale cigarette smoke. The blinds were drawn, blocking out the cheerful weekend sun. My world was illuminated only by the cold blue glow of 3 high-definition monitors arranged in a semicircle on a cheap folding table. On the left monitor, I had the live tracking map of the Aerostream Logistics Network. It was a beautiful web of moving dots. 500 trucks were currently on the road, hauling everything from consumer electronics to perishable food across the Pacific Northwest. 20 warehouses were active, their inventory levels fluctuating in real time as forklifts scanned pallets in and out. On the right monitor, I had a command terminal open. It was a black void with a blinking green cursor, waiting for my input. On the center monitor, I had a live feed from the resort. It was not an official broadcast, of course. I had simply hacked into the guest Wi-Fi network, a network I had set up for Julian 2 years ago, and mirrored the stream from the social media wall that was projecting Instagram posts tagged with Julian and Clarissa Forever. I watched as the guests arrived. There was Elena wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, laughing, with a group of women I did not recognize. She looked relieved. She looked like a woman who had successfully excised a tumor and was ready to enjoy her health. And there was Richard. He was wearing a white tuxedo jacket, looking every inch the patriarch he had never been. He was shaking hands, slapping backs, and accepting congratulations for raising such a fine son. He held a crystal tumbler of whiskey in one hand and a cigar in the other. He looked like he owned the place. In his mind, he did. He had successfully displaced the boring old financier and seized the throne. Then I saw Julian. He was standing at the altar waiting. He looked nervous, but triumphant. He was checking his phone every 30 seconds, likely looking for that confirmation from Zurich that the funds had cleared. He would not find it. The banking protocols on weekends are slow, and the technical glitch I had introduced into the routing number on the transfer document he signed would ensure the money remained in limbo for at least another 48 hours. The time was 9:58 in the morning. I took a sip of black coffee. My pulse was steady. My hands were dry. I did not feel like a villain. I felt like a surgeon about to perform a necessary amputation to save the patient from gangrene. The patient in this case was the concept of justice. The string quartet began to play Pachelbel's canon. The guests stood up. Clarissa appeared at the top of the aisle. 10 o'clock, I whispered to the empty room. I turned my attention away from the wedding and toward the center screen. The code was already written. It was a script I had named the gavel. It was simple, elegant, and devastating. The script targeted the central authentication server of the Nexus system. Once executed, it would revoke the SSL certificates for every device connected to the network. It would not just log them out, it would lock them out. Then, it would trigger a database command to encrypt the master SQL tables with a 256-bit key that only I possessed. I placed my finger on the Enter key. On the screen, Julian smiled as Clarissa reached the altar. Richard stepped forward beaming, ready to give the opening speech about legacy and bloodlines. "Happy wedding day, son," I said. At 10:05 in the morning, just as the officiant began to speak, I pressed Enter. The reaction was not immediate. Technology travels at the speed of light, but human comprehension travels at the speed of confusion. On my left monitor, the map of the logistics network began to change. The green dots representing active trucks started turning red. One by one at first, then in clusters, then in a cascading wave of crimson. The first error logs began to scroll down my center screen. Connection refused. Authentication failed. License token expired. Critical system halt. I leaned back and watched the dominoes fall. 300 miles away inside the cab of a semi-truck on Interstate 5, a driver named Mike was looking at his GPS tablet. Suddenly, the map disappeared. The screen flashed bright red. A message appeared in bold black block letters. System alert license revoked. Operating authority suspended. Do not proceed. Return to base immediately. Contact dispatch. Mike blinked. He tapped the screen. Nothing happened. The device was frozen. He picked up his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 49. My system just crashed. It says license revoked. Over." He was not the only one. Within 60 seconds, 500 drivers were staring at the same red screen. 500 drivers were reaching for their radios. At the 20 warehouses, the scene was even more chaotic. The forklifts used a Wi-Fi-enabled inventory system to locate pallets. Suddenly, the scanners in the hands of the workers let out a high-pitched error tone. The screens went dark. The inventory database, which told them where the millions of dollars of product were stored, simply vanished. "Hey, boss!" a worker shouted in the Jersey City hub. "The system is gone. It says data encrypted." What does that mean? The warehouse managers frantically tried to reboot their terminals. But when the computers restarted, they did not boot into Windows. They booted into a black screen with a single line of white text, property of Thomas Martinez. Access denied due to non-payment and intellectual property theft. Back at the resort, the ceremony was proceeding beautifully. The officiant was talking about love being patient and kind. Julian was holding Clarissa's hands. Then a sound cut through the serene atmosphere. It was a low, buzzing vibration. Julian ignored it. He was a professional. Then another buzz, then another. It was not just Julian's phone. In the front row, the phone of the chief operations officer, a man Julian had hired to replace me, began to vibrate against the wooden bench. Then, the phone of the vice president of sales. The guests shifted uncomfortably. This was supposed to be a phone-free ceremony. Julian's phone, tucked into the inner pocket of his custom tuxedo, buzzed a fourth time. It was a long, sustained vibration. That meant it was a priority call. He twitched. I could see it on the live feed. He wanted to check it. He fought the urge. But then, the automated emails hit. At exactly 10:06 in the morning, the mail server in Saul's office released the batch of legal notices we had prepared. The first email went to the Commercial Lending Division of the First National Bank. The subject line was, "Notice of immediate withdrawal of personal guarantee. Material adverse change." The email detailed that I, Thomas Martinez, had severed all ties with Aerostream, and that the company was now in breach of its loan covenants. It also attached the proof that the core IP asset, the Nexus software, was no longer available to the borrower. The second batch of emails went to Aerostream's top 5 clients: Amazon, Walmart, Costco, Target. The subject line was urgent cancellation of cargo insurance and operating authority. It informed them that as of 10 o'clock that morning, the trucks carrying their goods were uninsured and operating with unlicensed software. The reaction in the corporate world is faster than the reaction at a wedding. Algorithms at the bank flagged the email. Risk management software at Amazon flagged the insurance cancellation. At the wedding, the chief operations officer could not take it anymore. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, keeping it low so as not to be rude. He glanced at the screen. His face went pale. It was a pallor visible even on the grainy social media feed. He stood up. The officiant stopped speaking. "Is everything all right?" The COO looked at Julian. He didn't care about the ceremony anymore. He didn't care about the aesthetic. He cared about the fact that his career was evaporating. "Julian," he hissed, "you need to check your phone." "Not now, Dave," Julian whispered aggressively, his eyes wide with embarrassment. "Julian, the system is down," Dave said, his voice rising in panic. "The whole thing? The drivers are grounded. Amazon just sent a stop work order." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Richard frowned, looking annoyed that his moment in the spotlight was being interrupted. "What are you talking about?" Julian snapped. "It is a glitch. Call IT." "I can't call IT," Dave said, holding up his phone. "IT is locked out. The screens are saying... They are saying the license is revoked." Julian froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax statue. He released Clarissa's hands. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He saw the notifications. 50 missed calls from dispatch. A text from the bank. Urgent loan, recall notice. An email from Amazon contract suspension. And at the top of the stack, a simple automated text message from the server itself, sent to the administrator account, "Goodbye, Julian." I watched on my monitor as Julian looked up from his phone. He looked around the beautiful vineyard, the white flowers, the well-dressed guests. He looked at Richard, who was looking confused and useless. Then he looked directly at the camera that was live streaming the event, almost as if he knew I was watching. "Thomas," he mouthed. The chaos that followed was absolute. The vice president of sales was already on the phone shouting at someone. "What do you mean the customer data is encrypted? What is the decryption key?" The warehouse managers were calling the executives. The drivers were calling the managers. The noise of 100 ringtones began to compete with the string quartet, who had uncertainly started playing softly again. Richard stepped forward, trying to regain control. Now, everyone. Let us have some decorum. This is a wedding. Put the phones away." "Shut up, Richard!" Julian screamed. The sound tore through the microphone on his lapel, amplifying his rage across the entire valley. "The company is dead. Don't you get it? He killed it." "Who?" Richard asked, bewildered. "Thomas," Julian yelled. "He shut it down. He shut everything down." Elena stood up, clutching her chest. "Julian, calm down. It is just a computer problem. We can fix it on Monday." "There is no Monday, Mom," Julian shouted, turning on her. "The trucks are uninsured. The bank just called the loan. Do you know what that means? It means they are going to freeze the accounts in about 5 minutes." As if on cue, Julian's phone buzzed again. He looked at it. It was a notification from his personal banking app. Account frozen, due to pending litigation and cross-collateralization default. Julian dropped the phone. It hit the wooden deck of the gazebo with a hollow thud. The guests began to stand up. The whispers turned into loud conversations. This was not just a scene. It was a scandal. This was the kind of disaster that would be talked about in their social circles for a decade. The wealthy do not like to be near failure. It is contagious. I saw the senator check his watch and whisper something to his wife. They began to move toward the exit. Clarissa was standing alone at the altar. She looked at Julian, who was screaming into a borrowed phone, trying to reach the IT director. She looked at Richard, who was pouring himself another drink with a shaking hand. She looked at the guests fleeing the sinking ship. She did not look heartbroken. She looked disgusted. Back in my apartment, I leaned forward and typed one final command into the terminal. This was the coup de grace. It was a command to wipe the local backups on the servers at the headquarters. rm-rf/backup/local/ I pressed enter. On the screen, a progress bar appeared. Deleting. 10%, 40%, 100%. Done, I said. I closed the laptop. I turned off the monitors. The blue glow vanished, plunging the room back into the soft gray light of the shaded afternoon. I stood up and stretched. My back cracked. I felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired. It was the fatigue of a man who has finished a long, hard day of manual labor. I picked up my phone. I had missed calls from Julian, 7 of them in the last 3 minutes. I had missed calls from Elena. I had a voicemail from Richard. I powered the phone off. I removed the SIM card and snapped it in half. I dropped the pieces into the trash can. I walked into the small kitchenette and opened the fridge. There was a single beer there, a cheap domestic brand. I cracked it open. I walked to the window and peeked through the blinds. The street outside was quiet. Life was going on as normal. People were walking their dogs. Cars were stopping at the red light. They had no idea that 300 miles away, a $50 million empire had just evaporated into the ether. I took a long sip of the beer. It was cold and crisp. To the happy couple, I toasted to the empty room. I grabbed my suitcase. It was time to go. The next phase of the plan required me to be very hard to find. I had a flight to catch and a new life to begin. Julian had his legacy now. He had the ashes. I had the fire. The wedding of the century had officially dissolved into the nightmare of the decade. The gazebo, once a picture of serenity, was now ground zero for a corporate meltdown. Julian stood clutching the phone he had borrowed from Dave, the COO. His face, usually tanned and confident, was the color of wet chalk. He was listening to the warehouse manager from New Jersey scream on the other end of the line. "Boss, listen to me. It is chaos down here. The drivers are blocking the loading bays because they can't log out. The Amazon rep just walked in with a lawyer. They are talking about breach of contract. They are saying $5,000 a minute in penalties." "What do I tell them, Julian? Are you there?" "Tell them to wait," Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "Tell them it is a server reboot. Just stall them." "Stall them," the manager laughed, a hysterical sound. "Julian, the screens are locked. They say license revoked." "This isn't a glitch. Someone pulled the plug. We are dead in the water." Julian ended the call. His hand was shaking so badly, he almost dropped the device. Before he could even catch his breath, the phone rang again. It was a number he recognized. The senior account manager at First National Bank. "Mr. Martinez," the banker's voice was cold, professional, and terrifying. "This is a courtesy call. We received notice this morning of a material adverse change in your guarantor status. Per the terms of your lending agreement, this triggers an immediate default clause on your $10 million credit facility." "No, no, no," Julian stammered, pacing frantically back and forth in front of the horrified guests. "That is a mistake. My stepfather. He didn't mean to send that. We are sorting it out. The notice was certified Mr. Martinez, the banker cut in. And, frankly, given the sudden cancellation of your insurance policies, the bank considers your risk profile to be critical. We are initiating asset preservation protocols. Your operating accounts will be frozen in exactly 30 minutes to secure whatever liquidity remains. You can't do that, Julian screamed. It is my wedding day. You will ruin me. The freeze is automated, sir. 30 minutes. Click. Julian stared at the phone. He looked up, his eyes wild. He spotted Richard, standing by the open bar, nursing a drink, looking like he wished he could teleport away. "Dad!" Julian yelled, sprinting toward him. "Dad, you have to help me. The bank is calling the loan. 10 million. They are freezing the accounts. You know these people, right? You know how to talk to bankers. Call your contacts in Zurich. Get the bridge loan approved now." Richard shrank back. The facade of the visionary tycoon crumbled instantly, revealing the frightened con man beneath. He held his whiskey glass like a shield. I don't know the specific bankers, Julian," Richard stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "My contacts are more strategic, big-picture guys. They don't handle loan defaults on a Saturday." "Strategic," Julian grabbed Richard's lapels. "Strategy is useless right now. I need cash. I need liquidity. You said you had millions in backing. Where is it?" "It takes time, son," Richard whined, trying to pry Julian's hands off his tuxedo. "These things take time. Why are you yelling at me? How was I supposed to know your stepfather was going to do this? This is his fault. You said he was a nobody," Julian shouted, shaking him. "You said he was just a bean counter. A bean counter just nuked my entire life in 10 minutes. The guests were openly staring now. The Whisper network was in overdrive. "Did he say the bank called the loan? Is he bankrupt?" "My husband invested in his Series B round. We need to call our lawyer." Then a text message notification pinged on the borrowed phone. It was from an unknown number. Julian opened it. It was a single PDF file. He tapped it. The document opened. It was a high-resolution scan of the Acknowledgement of Service, Notice of Immediate Termination of License Agreement. There was his signature, right there at the bottom. The signature he had scrawled so arrogantly on Thursday night, thinking he was signing for encryption keys. Below the signature, there was a timestamp Thursday, 8:42 p.m. And below that, a short message from the sender. "You agreed to this, Julian. You signed the termination. You knew the license was ending today. No court will grant you an emergency injunction because you consented to the shutdown. Enjoy the wedding." Julian dropped to his knees. The reality hit him like a physical blow. He had signed his own death warrant. He had been so eager to push Thomas out, so eager to grab the assignment, that he had blindly agreed to the destruction of his company. "No," he moaned. "No, no, no." Elena rushed over to him. She was crying, her mascara running down her face in dark streaks. She grabbed the phone from the deck where he had dropped it earlier and dialed the one number she knew by heart. "Thomas," she shrieked as soon as the line connected. "Thomas, answer me." I was in a taxi heading to the airport when I answered. I put the phone on speaker so I could enjoy the sound of the wind rushing by. "Hello, Elena," I said. My voice was calm, the voice of a man discussing the weather. "What are you doing?" she screamed. "You are insane. You are destroying everything. Julian is on his knees. The bank is taking everything. You are killing your own son." "He is not my son, Elena," I said. "You made that very clear, and I am not killing anyone. I am simply repossessing my property. You told me I was an outsider. You told me my contributions were just duty. Well, now I have relieved myself of that duty. I have taken back my software, my guarantee, and my insurance. Why are you upset? Isn't this what you wanted? A life without my interference." "It is $400,000 in debt," she wailed. "We will lose the house. We will lose the cars." "You already lost the house, Elena," I said. "The trust sold it yesterday. The new owners take possession on Monday. I suggest you start packing." "You monster," she sobbed. "How can you be so cruel?" "Cruelty is telling a man who raised a child for 18 years that he is just a wallet," I said. "This is not cruelty. This is accounting. I am balancing the ledger. Goodbye, Elena." I hung up and tossed the burner phone out the window of the taxi. It shattered on the highway behind me. Back at the wedding, the final act was about to begin. 2 black sedans pulled up to the entrance of the vineyard. 4 men in suits got out. They did not look like wedding guests. They walked with the purposeful stride of law enforcement. They marched past the stunned security guards, past the weeping mother, and straight to the gazebo. One of them flashed a badge. "Julian Martinez?" the agent asked. Julian looked up, dazed. "Yes. I am Agent Miller with the Economic Crimes Division. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of corporate embezzlement fraud and misappropriation of secured funds." The crowd gasped. A collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the garden. "What?" Julian whispered. "Embezzlement. We received a detailed dossier regarding payments made to a shell company R.B. Strategic Consulting," the agent said. He turned to Richard. "And you must be Richard Bennett. We have a warrant for you as well. Conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering." Richard dropped his glass. It shattered on the stone floor. "Now, wait a minute," he stammered, backing away. "I was just a consultant. I didn't know where the money came from." "You can explain that to the judge," the agent said. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The click of the metal cuffs was the loudest sound in the valley. Clarissa, standing at the altar in her $50,000 dress, watched as her groom was handcuffed. She watched as her new father-in-law was shoved against a pillar and patted down. She looked at Julian. There was no pity in her eyes, only calculation. "I think," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "that we should annul this immediately." She turned and walked away, her long train dragging over the rose petals that had been scattered for a celebration that never happened. Julian watched her go. He watched his mother sobbing on the grass. He watched his visionary father being dragged toward a police car. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he heard the click of a keyboard, the sound of a dinosaur pressing enter. 3 days after the wedding that never happened, the silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I was sitting in my rented apartment drinking tea and reading the Financial Post on my tablet. The headline in the business section was not subtle. Logistics, unicorn crashes. Aerostream operations suspended amidst allegations of fraud and insolvency. It takes a lifetime to build a reputation, but in the digital age, it takes about 48 hours to turn a $50 million company into a radioactive crater. Without the Nexus software, the company was lobotomized. The trucks were just expensive metal boxes sitting on the sides of highways. The warehouses were paralyzed. Competitors like DHL and FedEx had already swooped in, picking up the stranded contracts for pennies on the dollar. They did not even have to fight for the business. The clients were desperate, begging anyone with a valid insurance certificate to move their rotting cargo. Julian was out on bail. His mother had used the last of her jewelry to pay the bondsman. He was technically a free man, but in reality he was a walking corpse. I had read the court filings online. The list of creditors lining up to sue him was longer than the guest list for his wedding. Amazon was suing for breach of contract. The bank was suing for immediate repayment of the $10 million loan. The leasing companies were repossessing the trucks. And the Department of Labor was investigating him for failing to make payroll. He was 28 years old, and he was negative $5 million in the hole. I scrolled down to the lifestyle section. There was a smaller article tucked away near the bottom. Senator's daughter seeks annulment. Clarissa had not wasted a single second. Her lawyers had filed the paperwork on Monday morning, citing fraudulent inducement. She claimed Julian had misrepresented his financial standing and his character. She did not just want a divorce. She wanted the legal record to state that the marriage had never existed. She wanted to scrub the stain of Julian Martinez from her history, as if he were a bad spray tan. She had already flown to Paris, presumably, to recover from the trauma of almost marrying a pauper. I put the tablet down. It was almost noon. I knew they would be coming soon. I had not made myself hard to find. I had let Saul drop a hint to Julian's public defender about where I was staying. I wanted them to come. I needed this final act to be face-to-face, or at least face-to-camera. The first domino to fall that day was Elena. I had access to the security logs of the North Vancouver house via my phone, a habit I had not yet broken. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I got a notification: motion detected at front door. I pulled up the feed. Elena's Mercedes, which was likely days away from repossession, screeched into the driveway. She got out. She looked like a woman who had aged 10 years in 3 days. Her hair was messy, her clothes were wrinkled, and her eyes were wild. She marched up to the front door and jammed her key into the lock. It did not turn. I watched as she tried again. She jiggled it. She pushed it. She pulled it. Then she stepped back and looked at the door, as if it had betrayed her. She did not notice the small, discreet sign posted on the window: Property Management by Vanguard Trust. No trespassing. She started pounding on the door. "Open up!" she screamed. "I live here, let me in." But nobody opened the door because nobody lived there anymore. The house was empty. The furniture she loved, the curtains she had picked out, the life she had curated, it was all gone. The trust had executed the sale clause the moment I gave the order. The new owners, a developer looking to flip the land, had changed the locks on Saturday night, while she was busy crying at the police station. She collapsed on the front porch. I watched her curl into a ball on the welcome mat, a mat that I had bought. It was a pathetic sight. A part of me, the part that had been her husband for 18 years, felt a twinge of pity. But then, I remembered the dinner at La Poget. I remembered her telling me to just sit down and clap. I remembered her silence when her son called me an outsider. The pity evaporated. She was not a victim. She was an accomplice who had bet on the wrong horse. 2 hours later, the banging started on my own door. I was in a secure apartment building, but tailgating is easy when you are desperate. They had slipped in behind a delivery driver. I walked over to the intercom monitor mounted on the wall. The camera showed the hallway. There they were, the remnants of the Martinez dynasty. Julian looked like he had been in a street fight. His lip was swollen, probably from a rough encounter in the holding cell. His designer shirt was stained. He was shaking, vibrating with a mix of rage and withdrawal from the adrenaline of his former life. Elena was standing behind him, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "Thomas," Julian screamed, pounding his fist against the wood. "I know you are in there. Open the damn door." I stood perfectly still. I did not say a word. "Thomas, please." Elena's voice joined in. "We need to talk. We have nowhere to go. The house is locked. Richard is gone." Ah, Richard. The visionary. The inspiration. It turned out that Richard's loyalty was exactly as durable as his credit rating. As soon as he made bail using money, he had likely skimmed from the consulting fees. He had vanished. Saul had told me that Richard was likely on a bus to Mexico or a flight to a non-extradition country. He had left his son to face the felony embezzlement charges alone. It was the most predictable plot twist in history, yet Julian had been blind to it. "Open the door!" Julian yelled again. He kicked the bottom of the door. "You ruined my life, you petty old man! You ruined everything!" I pressed the button on the intercom that allowed me to speak without opening the door. "Go away, Julian," I said. My voice came out of the speaker in the hallway, tinny and distorted, like the voice of God from a cheap radio. "I won't go away," Julian shouted, looking up at the camera lens. "You owe me. You stole my company. That software was mine." "It was never yours," I said calmly. "It was licensed. You violated the license. You suffered the consequences. That is how the real world works. You wanted to be a tycoon. This is lesson number 1. Read the contract. Mom is homeless, Julian screamed. You locked her out of her own house. How can you do that? It wasn't her house, I said. It was the trust's house. And since she is divorcing the trustee, her beneficiary status was revoked. I told you, Julian. I am liquidating. Elena pushed Julian aside and pressed her face close to the camera. Her eyes were red and swollen. Thomas, she sobbed. Thomas, listen to me. I am sorry. Okay, is that what you want? I am sorry. We were wrong. We treated you badly. But this is too much. You have made your point. Please, just let us in. Let us figure this out. We are family. We are not family, I said. Family are the people who sit at the family table. I was told I didn't belong there. Remember. I didn't mean it, Julian yelled. I was stressed. I wanted to impress Richard, but he is gone, Thomas. He left us. It is just us now. You, me, and Mom. Like it used to be. We can rebuild. You can fix the code. You can call the bank. Please, Dad. Fix it. He called me Dad. He hadn't called me Dad since he was 12 years old. He threw the word out like a desperate Hail Mary pass, hoping it would catch in my heart and pull me back into the trap. But it bounced off. I can't fix it, Julian, I said. The company is bankrupt. The reputation is destroyed. And frankly, I don't want to fix it. I am retired. You have money, Julian shouted, his tone shifting instantly back to aggression when the charm failed. We know you moved millions to the Caymans. Give us the money. We need legal defense. We need a place to live. That money is for my retirement, I said. It is for the years I have left. You are 28. You have a lifetime to earn your own money. I suggest you start looking for a job. I hear the warehouse is hiring forklifts drivers, although you might be blacklisted there. Julian screamed a word that I will not repeat. He threw his shoulder against the door. The wood splintered slightly, but the deadbolt held. I picked up my phone and dialed 911. Emergency, the dispatcher said. This is Thomas Martinez, I said. I am at the Oakwood Apartments Unit 4B. There are 2 people attempting to break down my door. They are violent and unstable. I have a restraining order pending. I fear for my safety. Officers are on the way, the dispatcher said. I waited. Outside, the screaming continued. They cycled through every stage of grief in rapid succession. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression. But they never reached acceptance. They just kept looping back to anger. 10 minutes later, I heard the heavy footsteps of boots in the hallway. Police, step away from the door. I watched on the monitor. Julian tried to argue. He pointed at the door, screaming about his rights, about how I was a thief. The officers were not interested in corporate litigation. They were interested in the man kicking a door in a residential building. When Julian grabbed the officer's arm, it was over. They slammed him against the wall. Handcuffs again. For the second time in 3 days. Elena was screaming, trying to pull the officers off him. He is just upset. He is a CEO. You can't treat him like this. Ma'am, step back or you will be detained as well, the officer barked. I watched them drag Julian away. I watched Elena stumbling after them, weeping. The hallway fell silent. I turned off the monitor. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel happy. I felt like a janitor who had finally cleaned up a very large, very messy spill. It was done. The next morning, I had one final meeting. It was at Saul's office. I sat at the head of the conference table. Saul sat to my right. On the other side of the table sat Elena and a court-appointed lawyer representing Julian, who was currently in a holding cell, awaiting arraignment on the new assault and disturbance charges. Elena looked like a ghost. She stared at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. Here is the offer, I said, sliding a thin file across the polished wood. The lawyer picked it up. What is this? It is a deal, I said. Currently, the district attorney is building a case against Julian for the embezzlement. They have the bank records, but they are missing the context. They need a witness to testify that those payments to Richard were unauthorized and fraudulent. Without my testimony and without the specific internal audit logs I possess, their case is strong, but not watertight. He might get off with probation and a fine. And with your testimony, the lawyer asked. With my testimony and with the digital forensic trail I have preserved, he goes to federal prison for 5 to 10 years, I said. I can prove intent. I can prove he structured the payments to avoid detection. I can bury him. Elena made a small, choking sound. What do you want? The lawyer asked. I want a clean break, I said. I want Elena to sign the divorce papers today. Uncontested. No alimony. No claim on my assets. No claim on the offshore accounts. A complete severance. And for Julian, I want a signed confession of judgment regarding the debt he owes me personally, I said. I won't collect on it because he has no money, but I want it on record so he can never sue me for the company failure. And I want a permanent restraining order. If either of them comes within 500 feet of me or contacts me or mentions my name to the press, I hand the audit logs to the DA immediately. The lawyer looked at the papers. He looked at Elena. Take the deal, the lawyer whispered to her. If Thomas testifies, your son is gone for a decade. Elena looked up at me. Her eyes were hollow. Why, Thomas, she whispered. Why did you have to take it this far? We were happy once. We were never happy, Elena, I said. I was useful, and you were comfortable. There is a difference. And when I stopped being useful, you made sure I was no longer comfortable. I am just returning the favor. I hate you, she said. That is fine, I said. Indifference is what I was aiming for, but hate works too. Just sign the papers. She picked up the pen. Her hand trembled, but she signed. She signed away the marriage, the claim to the assets, the last tether, to the man who had supported her for 18 years. The lawyer signed on behalf of Julian. It is done, Saul said, gathering the documents. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a physical sensation of release. Goodbye, Elena, I said. She did not answer. She just put her head in her hands and wept. I walked out of the office and into the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby. I was 64 years old. I was single. I was homeless in the sense that I had no fixed address. But I had my dignity. I had my money. And I had the absolute certainty that I would never again let someone treat me like an option in my own life. The elevator doors opened. The sun was shining outside. It was a Tuesday, a regular boring Tuesday. And it was the most beautiful day I had seen in years. The air in Montana is different. It is thinner, cleaner, and carries the scent of pine instead of the metallic tang of exhaust and anxiety. I sat on a folding canvas chair on the edge of Flathead Lake, watching my fishing line disturb the mirrored surface of the water. The only sound was the wind moving through the Douglas firs and the occasional cry of an eagle circling overhead. It had been 6 months since the collapse of the Aerostream empire. 6 months since I walked out of Saul's office and left my former life on the conference table. To the locals here, I am just Thomas. I am the quiet, retired guy in the cabin up the ridge who drives a beat-up Ford pickup truck and pays for his groceries in cash. They do not know that I was the architect of a $50 million logistics network. They do not know that I destroyed that network in a single morning. And they certainly do not know that I am the subject of a cautionary tale being whispered in the boardrooms of Vancouver. I reeled in my line, checking the bait. It was gone. A clever fish had taken the meal without getting hooked. I smiled. I could respect that. It was a strategy I wished I had learned earlier in life. Take what you need to survive, but do not get attached to the hook. My financial affairs were finally settled. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands were secure, untouchable by any lawsuit or claim. But there was one final loose end I had tied up last month: the Nexus software. Since the termination of the license, the code had been sitting dormant on my encrypted drives. It was a powerful tool too valuable to let rot. 2 weeks ago, I flew to Seattle for a meeting with the CEO of a major logistics competitor, the very company that had been eating Julian's market share for breakfast. I sold them the Nexus source code. I did not sell it for stock options or a seat on the board. I sold it for a flat cash payment of $3 million. But I did not keep the money. I did not need it. I have enough to live comfortably for the rest of my days, and I have no heirs to leave it to. Instead, I established the Martinez Scholarship Fund. It is a specific grant designed for students from low-income backgrounds who want to study supply chain management or computer science. The criteria are strict. Grades matter, but character matters more. I personally review the essays. I look for the kids who work part-time jobs to support their parents. I look for the kids who understand that opportunity is a gift, not a right. I want to help the anti-Julians of the world. I want to fund the builders, not the parasites. Saul calls me once a month to give me updates. He tells me I should not want to know, but he knows I need to know. It is not about gloating. It is about confirming that the universe has corrected its error. Julian is working. He did not go to prison. The district attorney, satisfied with my cooperation and the recovery of some assets, allowed him to plead down to a misdemeanor negligence charge, provided he pay restitution. But with a fraud record and a bankruptcy attached to his name, no bank will touch him. No investor will take his call. He is currently working at a distribution center in Delta. He is not a manager. He is not a supervisor. He is a picker. He walks 15 miles a day on concrete floors, scanning barcodes and lifting boxes onto conveyor belts. He wears a neon vest and steel-toed boots. He clocks in at 7 in the morning and clocks out at 4 in the afternoon. Saul told me that Julian tried to apply for a management position at the same warehouse. The hiring manager Googled his name, saw the articles about the wedding disaster, and laughed him out of the office. So now Julian sweats for $18 an hour. He is finally learning the lesson I tried to teach him for 14 years. The logistics of life are heavy. Elena is living in a one-bedroom apartment in a subsidized housing complex on the outskirts of the city. She works as a receptionist at a dental clinic. It is honest work. It keeps a roof over her head. But there are no more trips to Europe. There are no more cashmere coats. There is just the bus ride to work, the 8-hour shift, and the lonely evening in front of a small television. I do not feel happy when I hear this. I do not pump my fist in the air or toast to their misery. I just feel a quiet, profound sense of balance. The scales have been zeroed out. They consumed my resources for nearly 2 decades, living a life they had not earned. Now, they are living the life they can afford. That is not cruelty. That is just gravity. The sun began to dip behind the mountains, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. I packed up my tackle box. I had not caught any fish today, but that did not matter. Fishing was never about the fish. It was about the silence. For 14 years, my mind was never silent. It was a constant cacophony of worry. Was Julian on track? Was Elena happy? Was the company safe? Was I doing enough? I carried their anxieties as if they were my own. I let them outsource their stress to me, while they kept the joy for themselves. I sat on the tailgate of my truck and looked out at the water. I thought about the concept of family. Society tells us that family is unconditional. We are taught that you sacrifice everything for the people you love, that you endure disrespect and ingratitude because blood or marriage is thicker than water. But nobody teaches us the difference between a family member and a parasite. A family member contributes. They may not contribute money, but they contribute respect, affection, and loyalty. It is a symbiotic relationship. You support them and they support you. A parasite does not contribute. It feeds. It attaches itself to a host and drains the nutrients until the host is withered and dry. And if the host tries to detach it, the parasite releases a toxin. It uses guilt. It uses manipulation. It screams, "How can you do this to me? I need you." Julian and Elena were not my family. They were an infection, and the surgery to remove them was painful. It left scars, but it saved the patient. This is the lesson I want to leave behind. This is the legacy I am actually proud of. It is not a software code or a bank account. It is the lesson of self-preservation. Self-preservation is often confused with selfishness. People think that putting yourself first is a moral failing. They are wrong. Self-preservation is the highest form of responsibility. You are the custodian of your own life. You are the guardian of your own dignity. If you allow yourself to be used, to be disrespected, to be discarded, you are failing in your primary duty to yourself. We are not martyrs. We are not required to set ourselves on fire to keep other people warm, especially when those people are complaining that the fire is not hot enough. I stood up and closed the tailgate. The metallic slam echoed through the trees. I walked around to the driver's side of the truck. I caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror. My hair was grayer than it was 6 months ago. My face had more lines. I looked like an old man, but my eyes were clear. The shadows that used to live under them were gone. I looked like a man who owned his own soul. I climbed into the cab. It smelled of old leather and coffee. I turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life. It was a rough, unrefined sound, but to me it sounded like music. I put the truck in gear and pulled out onto the gravel road. I was heading back to my cabin. Tonight, I would cook a simple dinner. I would read a book. I would sleep in a bed that belonged to me, in a house that belonged to me, in a life that belonged to me. There would be no phone calls from panicked warehouse managers. There would be no demands for money. There would be no insults wrapped in polite conversation. Julian had banned me from his wedding because he wanted to erase me. He wanted the photo album to show a version of his life where I did not exist. He wanted the glory without the foundation. Well, he got his wish. I am gone. I have removed myself from his narrative completely. I drove down the winding mountain road, leaving the lake behind. The headlights cut through the gathering dusk, illuminating the path ahead. I was alone, but I was not lonely. Solitude is the price of freedom, and it is a price I was happy to pay. They wanted a wedding without me. I gave them a life without me. And that was the most expensive gift I ever gave. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Thomas's decision. Did he go too far? Or was it exactly what they deserved? If you enjoyed this story of justice and self-respect, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Bittersweet Revenge, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need to hear it.